We are here on Friday, the 26th of September, with Lewis Bartlett from the University of Georgia. I'm not going to bother with all the letters and things because I don't even know what they all mean. So, Lewis has...
Neither do I.
So Lewis has agreed to take on the task of analyzing our field data.
Mm-hmm.
And we were so pleased that he is doing this. We would have come up with some pretty good stuff, but he's gone down many more rabbit holes than we would have. So other data that we would not have thought of. He's good at it. And welcome to Lakemont, Georgia.
Always a pleasure to drive up here.
Yeah.
It's a nice run from Athens, and you know, when we were at Georgia Beekeepers a couple of weeks ago,
2 weeks, yeah.
2 weeks ago now, that was not too long after y'all had put out the video explaining the study you were doing and showing your sampling techniques and talking about everything that was in there. And it was following that you know, my phone was ringing with other bee scientists from across the country saying, hey, you need to make sure that Bob understands this data, belongs in the scientific record. So that's when I got to bound up to you and say, hey Bob, can you give me a chance to get my sticky paws on those data sheets, and we'll get some modern statistics going. And I've only been beekeeping a little bit longer than I've been teaching statistics at the graduate level, kind of 15 and 13 years each. And we've got some, I think, really interesting findings out of it all. So
yeah, it's teaching us something. And you look so excited when you walked up. I was like, okay, see another side of Lewis.
Yeah,
cool.
Exciting about doing the numbers.
Right,
okay.
yeah.
very much so.
Yeah.
Okay, well, cool. I'm so glad you're here. Where do we even start? I don't know. So this is really two groups of data. You've got all of the different types of OAE strips, and you've got 3 different versions of that, plus 2 different versions of the technique for applying them.
Yeah.
And then you got all this stuff about all these individual queens, which is not necessarily what we expected to be analyzing when we started this thing. We had no idea that we were going to be analyzing so much when we started, and by the time we started creating these field papers, we're like, well, wait a minute, we could be comparing to that, to that, to that, to that, and you've helped us go down all those rabbit holes, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So she's the one. I have to thank her for keeping up with all the data, because if it was up to me, it probably wouldn't have happened. So she kept all the numbers straight and all the papers from getting torn up in the rain, and she took care of everything.
Yeah, and my lab members were saying they're the best data sheets they've ever had to input. Because
awesome.
my handwriting's absolutely terrible, so they're used to exactly what you were saying, Bob.
Well,
Chicken scratch on a water-damaged paper sheet, and they saw Selena's notes and said, see, Dr. Bartlett, it can be done.
Well, see,
So
it's not Dr. Selena. That's
yeah,
the
that's
difference.
why. Yeah.
It's Miss Selena. Sorry, we call her Miss Selena sometimes.
Okay.
Or I do.
All right, let's start
Sorry.
with the strips. Tell me what you found out on these strips and techniques
Well,
and stuff.
yeah, so the way we've done this analysis, it kind of gets to look at the whole experiment at once, and it's, 700, 800 colonies that you've got numbers for.
Yeah.
So even though some of the groups or combinations of this strip in this colony may not have that many individuals, this sort of modelling kind of leverages the size and scale of what you've done to be able to fill in the blanks. So it gives us numbers of what we'd expect for every combination of queen and treatment you tried. So you could say to me, well, what about strip B put on the comb with this queen, and I could give you a number that we'd expect. And that's sort of the benefit to doing it in this more modern way. I admit bits of it gave me a challenge, but we got there in the end. And I think the first thing to say is what struck me is the impact of the queens was more important for the number of Varroa in those colonies at the end of your measuring than what treatment went in. So the genetics mattered actually a little bit more than whether you put Oxalic in there and how you put it in. And it wasn't shocking, but it was surprising to see that. And I think it's good to see that a lot of these breeding programs are achieving what they're setting out to in terms of moving us towards colonies that are able to keep their Varroa numbers lower longer, so we're not having to treat as aggressively or move beyond our oxalic acid and other organic treatments.
Yeah, the needle is moving.
It is, definitely.
And Mother Nature's moving it too. There's a lot more feral colonies in the woods than there used to be 10, 15 years ago.
Indeed, and kind of talking about feral or unknown colonies, you had a few colonies in here that weren't of known parentage. They were left over from previous years, or I don't know if you catch swarms or not, Bob, but
No.
We don't go out of our way.
The short answer is no.
Yeah.
but they didn't have definitive genetics. They weren't from one of these named breeding programs, and they were the ones that did, by quite a margin, the worst.
Okay.
They, across all the different treatments, on average, ended up with about 4 mites per wash. And then all the other ones that were of known stock did better than that.
Okay. I guess we could start by explaining that all of our colonies, and we tested a lot of them, we could not find a mite in April.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah.
Exactly.
And,
You're right.
and that's how we started this thing out.
And you did it was like 6 or more colonies for every yard,
every
right?
yard,
Which is
yes.
very,
Yes.
it's a
no,
pretty
more than
expansive.
that.
It was
We
more
did
than
a
that.
bunch. Oh
At
gosh,
least,
yeah.
but at
Okay.
least 6 in each yard.
And on average, a lot more than that.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
We started looking for mites in January and quit in early
Yeah.
May and never found a mite.
Which doesn't, with your operation, doesn't surprise me. You've had me call you up before saying, hey, I need some extra colonies for a Varroa experiment.
And we didn't have any
Right.
variety.
And you don't have any Varroa
Right.
whenever I need them.
I remember that.
Yeah, and I think that was
Well,
last
as a
year.
As a side note, our winter vaporization was extremely effective. That's
Yeah.
why we had those 0 numbers.
Precisely. So I think that's something to explain, is that, we really are starting from a pre-measurement of 0 here.
Yeah.
So these end numbers are how much it's increased to.
Okay.
And then, so we had all these different queens, and we can get into the effect of those now that they've kind of talked about the spare ones, so to speak, that didn't fare so well. And then you had your different oxalic treatments, which I think the first thing to say is they differed in the amount of oxalic acid that was introduced into the colonies.
That's right. Varroxan strips had 7 grams per strip.
Mm-hmm.
The Varroa destructor, which we usually just call the Canadian strips,
Canadian strips, yep.
are 12 per strip. Then they just, I'm sure, approximately. Whereas our experimental homemade strips was an average of 13.6.
Yep. And you were putting 4 of those in each,
Right.
in each
In
main.
every case, 4
deep.
strips were applied.
Yep.
I was talking to David Westerfelt. I've got his Westerfelt, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
At the GBA meeting, and some people put 6 Varroxan strips in a large colony, which would make a difference.
It would. And
Okay.
before we start talking about whether they were placed on the top bars or down against the comb, in line with those doses, the more oxalic acid, the better.
Yes.
Was the basic result. The highest performing treatment was your experimental one, which was the most oxalic acid, and then the Canadian strips, as we're calling them, were a little bit more intermediate, and then the Varroxan, which contained the least amount of oxalic acid, had the smallest effect on reducing Varroa compared to the others and the control colonies.
Of course, the one missing is Alu and Cap. Somebody asked me, why didn't you put that in there? And we weren't even thinking like that in the beginning. We didn't need all those different things. But the Alu and Cap amount of oxalic acid actually falls between the Varroxan and the Canadian strips. I believe it's 9.
I believe so. I'm sure you can append that on.
Yeah, I can correct that in the video if I need to, but I think it's 9, which falls right in between Varroxan and Varroa. And we did a study on them. You and I did this like 4 years ago.
Myself, you, Jennifer
In
Berry,
fact, I'll put a
others.
link at the end of this video if anybody's interested in that study. And we showed that the Alu and Cap, just like these, was not a curative treatment. It's a maintenance
Preventative.
stopgap between the winter, spring treatment, and fall treatment. It does not bring numbers down,
No.
as did none of these.
Indeed, and I think that's a pattern we're seeing across a lot of these extended release oxalic acid approaches, We saw it with Jennifer Berry's work, where she was doing summertime, high dose, repeat vaporizations, work that's been done by others as well, Cameron Jack down in Florida, as well as other scientists, kind of showing that these summertime, lower level, constant oxalic acid exposures are really quite good at keeping low Varroa numbers low. They're not going to bring a colony back from the brink whose Varroa has grown too high.
Right.
And I think that's consistent with what you've shown here. We did a large Varroxan experiment last year, joint with Jeff Williams' lab at Auburn University, and similarly, that's what we found. Our Varroa numbers were quite high, and the Varroxan didn't do a great job at cleaning that up. Jeff Williams' colonies started with quite low Varroa numbers, and they stayed quite low. And I think that's a repeat message we're going to keep encountering, is that these things are preventative until your operation or your climate allows you to get a treatment in that's going to really knock down whatever's in there.
Okay. You want to share some numbers with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best performing, which was your experimental high dose, had less than a third of the mites at the end compared to the untreated control colonies. Your average control colony came in at about 2.7 mites in a wash at the end. The ones treated with the experimental were at 0.9, so less than 1 mite per wash, which is pretty good, I think.
And those were colonies that had not been treated since last year.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I should add that all the queens heading those colonies came from some sort of breeding program towards mite resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to consider that too.
We do. But we can talk about the effect of the queens, and a lot of this is about separating the two so that we don't have to worry too much about unequal distribution of treatments between yards. And I'm sure people watching this video are thinking, well, was this balanced? No, it wasn't. But you apply the right sort of technique to it, and you can peel apart some of those challenges. The Canadian strips, especially when they're applied at the comb, did fairly well. They had about half the number of Varroa in a mite wash as the control colonies, about 1.5 mites per wash. They fared less well when they were placed on the top bars. Then you're running at about 2.5 mites per wash. And that's about in line with the Varroxan strips applied per the label or per instruction against the comb. And unfortunately for me and you, Bob, because we both talked about the annoyances of how these can kind of cleave to the brood and mess up the bridge comb. Putting the Varroxan on the top bars, unfortunately, did nothing at all with them coming out, just like the controls, with about 2.8 mites per wash. So
yeah, that's a surprise. We thought it was having some effect when we were looking at it casually. Just goes to show that casual observation doesn't always lead you right.
Yeah,
all the data was surprising to us.
So some benefit to using the Varroxan, per instruction, but by far and away the high dose experimental ones on the top bars worked best. I think what's worth pointing out though is while the dose rank matches how they fell out, there's not that much difference in oxalic between the amount in these Canadian strips and the amount in the experimental one. They're pretty close, less than 2 grams difference out of 12 and 13.5,
right,
which is marginal. Yeah. But the difference in effectiveness was pretty big.
Yeah.
We're talking.
They're on different types of pads too,
They are, but if you think about it, they're less square inches of exposure. Those aren't that big.
Right.
I think if you added up the square inches of exposure, it's notably less than the Canadian strips.
For sure.
And
Those
the
Canadians are
Canadian-
long and
the Canadian strips are down in the cone,
Exactly.
and ours are just laying on
on
the top
top.
bars.
Yeah.
Figure
So
out
what's
what
the
difference
comparison
is.
of the Canadian on top to ours?
So the Canadian on top, you ended up with about 2.3, 2.4 mites in a typical colony at the end.
Right.
Whereas yours was
point.
less than 1.
I wonder,
per
that's
wash.
crazy because the oxalic amount isn't that much different.
Yeah, exactly.
But yet And it's that's
Yeah, and I think these discrepancies we're seeing in things like Varroxan's performance across regions really highlights something you say all the time at Blue Ridge, which is that beekeeping is a local
Oh
affair.
yeah, I have a letter from Tim Liptak in Charleston. If you're okay to read it.
Yeah, go
right.
ahead.
Yeah.
It's a little bit long. I'll leave a little of it out, but if the first sentence puts it perfectly. If I have learned anything from you, it is that beekeeping is local.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Who knew, right?
Right.
Living in the low country of South Carolina, we are challenged with extremely high temperatures in the summer, June through August. This year we experienced many days in July and August that were above 100 degrees Fahrenheit and actually had readings of over 110 Fahrenheit in downtown in July. Here's the kicker.
Yeah.
With 100% humidity.
Yeah.
I don't know how do you live in that? I don't know.
And work bees and
Anyway, so they had more precipitation than the previous year. We mixed OA recipe to Randy Oliver specs. I have a minor in chemistry, so I'm very fastidious on how I mix the OA glycerin, careful with the heat, using new equipment, controlled setting, storing properly, took it very seriously. We applied the pads to double deeps, which is pretty much what we did. This treatment modality, mode of operation.
Sure, mode of application.
right.
Have to talk Tim into using smaller words.
Plain English.
The words.
That's Tim, yeah.
Yeah.
The treatment modality should give us some flexibility here because of our temperatures, shelving, formic, and thymol in parentheses. It's as a treatment to bridge summer to fall, which is what we're all trying to accomplish, And so all of my colonies had very robust brood patterns and were packed in a packed lower deep, creeping towards the second deep. These colonies were requeened with Poline queens, which we have in our stuff too.
Talk
before
about that in a
winter.
minute.
Treatment was applied from June to August, 2 months. I used OA vapor exiting winter to clean up the mites, so he started with real low numbers too.
Yeah.
What we saw, and I've gotten this in the comments and the videos too from a couple of people, what we saw based on 4 beekeepers was a handful of queen deaths and the bees moving the brood nest above the pads into the second deep, leaving the bottom box devoid of anything, totally empty. In other words, they were trying to avoid these pads. And we saw none of that.
No.
And we saw I can't say that we didn't lose a single queen, but we sure didn't notice anything. So he had a problem. And some hives bearded excessively, which wasn't universal. He said he experienced that in 28%. I pulled the pads when I saw this and found that some were still wet, but others had crystallized and became quite hardened. We did see that.
Right, we
did see that.
Yep.
An empty deep is worrisome here because, as you know, unattended real estate is a magnet for small hive beetle. I don't know how I keep going off of his letter.
Yeah.
That place is built on a marsh. I don't know how they get along with small hive beetles.
Not well from my experience of talking to them.
Quickly requeened where needed and transferred the brood to the bottom box to equalize after removing the pads and decided to switch to Varroxan. Mite counts were very low in all colonies, zeros and ones. So he gave me a list of questions. Could this be a result of higher temperatures? Maybe.
Right.
Precipitation, a lot of rain, maybe. Keeping the bees keeping the bees indoors for longer periods of time. Higher humidity, maybe. We experienced that here when you were. Were you here for the blue paper towel, Randy Oliver's recipe?
Yes,
You were.
I
Okay.
did all the analysis for that.
Yeah,
certainly.
we had 160 colonies
Yep.
and proceeded to kill most of them
Yep.
because those blue paper towels did not work,
Yep.
but it was very humid.
We're still paying you back for that one, Bob.
Yeah. I don't bring it up much.
I do.
So I'm interested in if this has occurred in other areas, and I would like to know if it is indeed beekeeper error. I know Randy has said the bees controlled the temperature inside the hive, but I have trouble believing this with the unprecedented temperatures we were experiencing here, and I would add to that unprecedented humidity. Should we employ shim with treatment? Adjust our recipe? ? Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
All good points, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
remember Jorg said that high humidity he believed helped with the Varroa.
He said that. He did say that. Yeah.
That's what
But we're talking about the pads now.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All interesting stuff. You want to talk about the queen some?
Yeah, so part of this is understanding the effect the queens had so we can peel it out
Yeah.
from the effect of the treatments.